Hello everyone, I'm Kaushal and I'm with Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan. Today we will be discussing the recent political developments of South Korea. Hello sir.
Hello, Kaushal.
Sir, so I would like to begin by mentioning how South Korea is often regarded as a prosperous and developed democracy. The obvious question is that what might be the political compulsions or tendencies behind the imposition of martial law by President Yoon? But I would also like to ask, is there an underlying frustration within Korean society which might have pushed President Yoon for this decision?
I don't know if there's underlying frustration that caused it, because if you see the totality of circumstances and the response of the Korean people, a broad section of the Korean population seems to oppose to emergency and the martial law imposed. There's no political support to President Yoon. I think it's more because of a combination of circumstances. First, he's an amateur. His approach, his decisions are obviously very amateurish. They're not very politically well thought out. Second, there is a division of power because of separation of powers doctrine. The legislature, he does not command a majority. And almost by a fluke, in a system of runoff elections like in France, he got elected in the second round, if I'm not mistaken. So without political support, without political input, you can't make decisions like this. Third, he has no popular support. So at all levels of decision making and implementation, he went wrong. There is no case for national emergency and martial law. The circumstances do not warrant it. That he has some difficulties in getting the budget approved or the legislature is not listening to him is not a ground for imposing emergency. And he does not have the political clout in the country. He does not have popular support. But it's also a model case of what could happen if the institutions held. The legislature immediately met, unanimously, including the members of his own party in the parliament. They all voted against the emergency. Therefore, constitutionally, it was no longer possible, martial law, and he had to revoke it. At least he had the wisdom to revoke it rather than creating a confrontation between the army and the public. To that extent, he must be commended. But I think his position is untenable. Either he has to resign or he will be sacked by impeachment.
So moving on to the next question, like you mentioned, successive South Korean presidents, they faced legal action either due to corruption or other criminal charges. For example, we've had President Park, who was removed from power around 2016 on charges of bribery and coercion. So is this a sign of a healthy and stable functioning democracy? And if it is the case, what might be the learnings for the Indian political context?
Until 1980, South Korea was authoritarian. Well, into 80s, because of people's movement, some kind of a democratic practice has come into being. But until about 1997-98, it was semi-authoritarian. Kim Dae-jung is the first president who was elected in a genuinely democratic manner. He was the first opposition president. Until that time, whoever held the reins of power from the beginning, they continued, whether it was through elections or without elections. So in that sense, South Korea had those problems. But the instances you recounted, they show two things. One is that while individuals may exceed their jurisdiction or violate law or abuse power, the system is holding. That they could bring a president to heel, that this time the president was stopped by the legislature and he had to accede to their demands or their wishes. That shows that the system is holding, the guardrails are holding. The second also is that perhaps there is a sense of shame in that society. East Koreans and Japanese and others, the East Asians, they seem to have a sense of shame. Even in Japan, you've known instances of public men committing suicide when they were humiliated in public, when their corruption was made public. So South Korea and Japan in particular exhibit this attitude. In India, take emergency. Our 1975 emergency was a bit like what President Yoon did. Indira Gandhi, without even a cabinet approval, got it signed by the president in the middle of the night and imposed emergency, extinguishing all liberties overnight to overcome her personal political problems, almost exactly Yoon's condition. But our parliament refused to act. A, she had a overwhelming majority in parliament, and B, the parliament acted in a partisan manner. Almost all the opposition, say one or two members, they were all jailed immediately, and those in ruling party, they simply caved under. The cabinet, not one person resisted. So our guardrails did not hold at that time. Therefore, we had 19 months of dark emergency, as opposed to the South Korea certainly acquitted itself very well. So I think institutions are safe. It also means in a divided government, in a separation of powers doctrine, unless there is coordination and cooperation, if parties act in a very partisan manner, and that's what's happening in America right now. America has separation of powers. It's the first country to accept separation of powers doctrine. Therefore, legislature, executive, and judiciary are three arms of government, co-equal branches of government. And unfortunately, in recent decades, the Congress and the president, if they belong to different parties, there simply is no harmony at all. So it's almost impossible to get a president to get a law of his choice or his proposals to be approved by the legislature. And it's not a very happy thing. That's why American federal government is in a bit of a crisis. Now you can see in the Yoon's time, there is a bit of a crisis because his party has no majority in the legislature. He's not able to get anything through, including the budget. So either you must have a system like ours, where the executive branch of government also has majority in the legislature, and therefore there is a harmonious government once you have a stable majority, or you must have a culture of harmony between the executive and legislature, and you must be able to rise above partisanship in decision making and legislation. I think these are two important lessons for us.
I just had a follow-up question. You mentioned that President Yoon's own party went against him because of his move to impose martial law. Is this also a sign of internal party division within Korea?
I'm not sure about that. I think it's more about principled action. First of all, he has no serious support in the party itself. He's not a major leader in the party. He came by fluke. But if you notice, all the members of his party who voted, 18 of them, I think, they all voted against this martial law. And now the latest news today that emanates is that his party publicly called for his suspension. Basically, his party is asking for his removal. So I think two factors are playing a role. A principled stand to restore democracy. B, responding to popular urges, because across Korean society it appears almost the whole population is opposed to what the president has done. And the party understood that, and therefore they're responding politically in a sensible manner. I don't think it's an intra-party rivalry. I think it's more about the president completely being unmindful of the public mood and the context of the country, and simply taking the letter of the Constitution very seriously. It's a very important lesson for all democracies. You know, as Abraham Lincoln said, public opinion is everything. Without it, nothing can be done. With it, nothing will fail. So just because you have authority under the law, it does not mean you can actually get things done. A good leader certainly uses authority when necessary, but as a last resort. He must prepare the public, his own party, his own colleagues first. And if you don't do that, oftentimes, even if you take right decisions, you may not succeed. Farm laws are a good example. Farm laws in India were extremely good laws. I have consistently and repeatedly held that. They basically are trying to liberalize agriculture from the clutches of regulation, unfair regulation to the detriment of farmers, and give an opportunity for the price discovery. Therefore, while it's not sufficient, a lot more needs to be done. They are not a panacea, they are good. But even good laws ultimately were resisted because the government did not prepare the ground, prepare the public opinion, did not cogently argue why they were necessary, and therefore a very good opportunity was lost. Even today, you hear of UP farmers trying to stage a protest and then enter Delhi against the prohibitory orders, etc. So the problem is continuing. It's a good example. We are a stable democracy. We're not like South Korea. We're not even like United States, because our legislature and executive, they go together always. And therefore, once a government is formed, there's no serious doubt about who is in command. And the laws are made and budgets are passed as the executive wants. But despite that, you're seeing, because of one misjudgment, not preparing public opinion in a democracy, taking the letter of the law seriously, because you have a parliamentary majority, you can make the law. The nation is still paying the price, and more than the price paid in terms of law and order, etc., the real price paid in terms of delaying agricultural reform in the country. I think it's a very instructive experience for all of us, very cautionary tale.
So, also there has been an emergent discourse around the world which points towards a larger trend of democracies around the world increasingly resorting to authoritarian tendencies. So, do you think the imposition of martial law, even though it was reversed, do you think it points towards this larger trend?
I don't think this particular instance is a serious issue of authoritarian effort. It is a half-baked, almost juvenile effort by a president who simply was out of his depth. It's a very amateurish effort. If it's a serious effort, he would have prepared the armed forces. He would have prepared his own party, at least the people who were loyal to him or who were inclined to go for authoritarianism. Nothing of the kind happened. He simply took the letter of the law seriously. Some other amateur advised him that he actually literally can make an order like that without understanding the consequences, and therefore President bungled badly. This particular case, I don't think is an authoritarian push. It's an amateurish push by a very weak president out of his depth.
One final question, sir. How do you think populist leaders like President Donald Trump will view the events in Korea?
Mr. Trump is a bundle of contradictions. On the one hand, he has very publicly declared affection and respect for authoritarian leaders, whether it's Putin or Xi Jinping or the North Korean dictator or somebody else. It's a very strange mix. At the same time, he's a populist to the core. He got the votes. He dominated his party by his democratic effort to get the votes in the primary elections. And he got a majority now. And he always has an eye on the popular pulse. So he's a strange contradiction. So I don't think he's authoritarian in the traditional sense of, subverting the role of the majority or rule of the majority. I think he's authoritarian in the sense that he's intolerant of alternative views, particularly in his speech. I don't know if in actions he is that, but certainly he speaks in a very loose and cavalier manner in dealing with opposition. And hopefully, now that he got a genuine majority and a legitimate mandate, nobody contested it, he will contain his impulses during the tenure and act with some degree of grace and dignity. But I don't know if American institutions will allow authoritarianism, because in the last time around also, if you notice, 2020, not only the courts, on at least 26 occasions, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe more occasions, the courts held against the outgoing president. And most of the judges are appointed by him or his party. But more than that, the local government leaders at the state and local level, at the county and state level, in a very highly decentralized system of election conduct, many of them belonging to Republican Party, the president's own party, they all opposed the president on this issue. Even those who voted for President Trump in that election, they stood firm in favor of the constitutional and fair election. So American democracy has strong and deep roots. It's both broad and deep. And therefore, while an individual like Mr. Trump can create a problem, hopefully he will not be able to do irreparable damage.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, sir.